Hi, I'm Dylan from Velocity Tech Solutions. Today I'm going to be doing an overview on the motherboard replacement and processor replacement of a SC1430 motherboard. So first we're going to have our machine right here. We're going to open it up. So this is going to be a little bit more of a time-consuming motherboard replacement than most. So first thing we're going to do is we move this power cable. This is for the hard drive, so we also disconnect these data cables. Remember what port they were in. So we get this back. Now you'll notice we got this going across. First thing we do is we unscrew this screw right here in the middle of the board. Kind of hard to see at first, but we first get that. And that just kind of lifts up and out. Next we want to remove all of the cables connecting to the main board. Look at that. This intrusion switch. Power. And that should be everything for there. So next what we do is we'll notice this little piece that kind of latches this in place. So we remove this. We then push this out and then just pull it up. And then we just unhook the fan from there. Now for the second larger fan right here, you'll notice there's a screw right below where that other fan was. What we do is we unscrew that. And then we again unhook the fan from the front of the main board. And it should lift right out. Alright, now unfortunately this motherboard is not inside of a tray of any sort, so we do have to unscrew essentially every single screw on here. There should just be 3 more screws. That. And lastly, this. Oh. And also, if you have any processors installed, you also have to remove that entirely as well. You'll notice there's 4 screws on the heatsink. It's kind of threaded on with a spring, so just kind of screw it up enough so that it's no longer screwed in, but you don't want to completely have it disassemble from the heatsink. You'll be able to see that once we have it out of the case. Notice they're kind of threaded in there, so just leave them in enough. Next we would grab out the processor. Alright, so now we've got this entire board unsecured. Kind of push it back towards the front of the case, and then you should be able to kind of pull it up from the bottom. And then that should be it for you. So we'll then get another motherboard to put in here, essentially the same way. We again kind of lower it in. Actually, with this it's the easiest to kind of go in from the bottom upwards towards the top, since there are kind of things that you have to angle it under from the top. So it's easiest to kind of go like that. Let's try to line up the rear panel. And then also just try to, get it so you can see the screw holes through each of the screws. Should be fairly straightforward for you to see that. Now when putting in a new processor, this would probably be the easiest time to do it. Make sure that the top of the processor is clean. It's best to do this with kind of rubbing alcohol. You can kind of put a little dab on there, let it kind of wet, and then kind of rub it off with a lint-free cloth. That's the best way to go about it. You could probably just clean it off with a cloth as well, but it won't be quite as won't get quite as good results from the cooling with that. So we then lower the processor in. You'll notice there's a little notch right there. They'll kind of, and you'll also notice there's a little arrow that kind of corresponds with that arrow on the processor. Should just fall right in. Let's secure that. Now for your heatsink as well, again, ideally you would want to use rubbing alcohol, but honestly for the most part it should work just fine as long as you get a mostly clean surface. Alright. Now what we do is we have our screwdriver. Now go back with screwing everything in again. Oops. Very helpful to have a magnetic screwdriver for this. Just got a few more screws to get in here. Oops. And lastly, this screw is a little bit of a pain to get to, because you kind of have to lower it through this piece of metal. See, the screw did not always want to stay. There we go. Alright. Now that we've got the motherboard mostly secured, we'll kind of go back and re-secure all our cables. Should be fairly obvious where they all go. They're all about the perfect length for exactly where they go. Alright. The next step is you take this big fan again, make sure you've still got the screw. What we kind of do is when we lower this in, you'll notice there's this little ridge and then there's this little piece of metal where it'll kind of slide in. You can also kind of just bring all these power cables and just kind of feed them along the side so that they kind of are out of the way. And that screw hole should line up perfectly. Again, lower this fan in. You'll again notice there's a little groove that this goes on. Lowers into place. And you take this, you'll kind of notice, it's kind of hard to see from this angle, but there are two little grooves that they'll kind of slide onto, and they should kind of secure, and you'll notice they shouldn't move anymore. Lastly, what we do is make sure we get these two fans plugged back in. Then take this middle thing again. You'll kind of notice back here, a little circle thing and a little kind of square tab. Will kind of notch into here on the rear of the case, if you'll notice. And it should, oops, go in there and slide down here. There's a little notch that it fits into. And that should get it for you. And then just make sure you screw in this longer screw. Again, it can be kind of tricky to get at. And lastly, I do not actually have any thermal paste with me, but you would just kind of put like a little dab about the size of a BB or so, a little bit smaller than a pea. And then you would just kind of take your heatsink and line it up so that the 4 screws are matching up with these 4 screws here. And then lay it on. What I like to do is kind of get one side and then go for the opposite side. So if I did the bottom right, I'll do the top left. Then this way you're kind of securing it down so that the weight of the heatsink itself is spreading out the thermal paste. And what this does is it kind of gets you the best spread you can, and it doesn't give you any air bubbles, which will negatively affect your temperature. So you just screw it in until it doesn't screw anymore. Alright. And lastly, you'll have your, once this is lowered, you'll have your 2 data cables. Just plug them into the proper cables right here. And this power cable will plug into there. And then you'll just seal up your case and you'll be all set. Really everything else should be all set up for you at that point, and it should boot up and have no issues.